with Trump already being in office for here we go 11 days. We are, every day we hear new things, especially since he's starting his administration. So a lot of things are going to change. And one of the things he sort of put in motions is setting up or sort of expanding parts of Guantanamo Bay, specifically I think I have a name for it, the Guantanamo Migrant Operations Center, basically expanding the capacities or sort of adapting the capacities to be able to handle, I think, in some cases, he straight up says 30,000 migrants, specifically the most violent ones. And whenever other parts of his administration talk about it, they make sure to mention the violent part of it. We'll go to Trump's statement on it. It's like a minute. But before that, I want to get just a sort of small history, especially the legal aspects of or the legal status of Guantanamo Bay. Joining me today is James Valliant, so we'll get some of his legal expertise, especially since Supreme Court decisions on specifically this area, I think, is important in sort of evaluating what's really happening. So, James, before we go to Trump's statement, can you give us sort of a brief both history of why is America owning a part of Cuba or in control of a part of Cuba, and also what were the sort of past controversies and sort of where are we now when it comes to the legal status of Guantanamo Bay?
Well, there was the Spanish-American War, which was fought more than 6 years ago. It was a war between the Spanish Empire and the United States, a war in which the United States acquired territory from the Spanish Empire, including the Philippines and Puerto Rico. Part of the justification for that war was to liberate Cuba and to set up an independent government there. So way back at the beginning of the 20th century, when an independent government was set up by the United States in Cuba, the United States entered into a lease for the Guantanamo Bay area. And they were to pay, first it was supposed to be in gold specie, and then it became currency, obviously, as time went on. So America has a permanent, indefinite, by the terms of the lease, it's an indefinite lease. Of course, when the Batista government was overthrown by the communist government in the 1950s, the United States continued to assert that it had that lease. It attempted to pay, but Cuba has, over 60 years now, refused to accept any more rent payments on Guantanamo Bay. But nonetheless, the United States, in effect, has an ownership interest there via an indefinite lease with Cuba, which was engineered between America and the pre-communist government there. Cuba says it's ours. America says it's ours, but Cuba's not willing to fight over it. Now, Guantanamo Bay
Yeah,
has.
maybe I could just mention to the deal. Well, fun fact: it started with the payment was $2,000 in gold coin a year, and I believe it was expanded twice or sort of increased twice. So now it's $4,500 a year about. So it's a pretty good deal.
Pretty
Uh,
cheap rent for a military base. America
and
has used it, of course, for naval purposes, military purposes, ever since. And guess what? Americans, even long before Trump, and even before Guantanamo Bay became famous after 9/11 because that's where George W. Bush would put detainees that were captured on battlefields in Afghanistan and Iraq. He would say the worst of the 9/11 terrorists, the worst of the worst kind of Islamic terrorists were put there. But even before that, it was used to detain immigrants who were being deported. It's been used for immigration purposes even before Trump. And, nor has deportation been unprecedented in American history. Just a recent example, Barack Obama deported more than 3 million people, and not all of them criminal aliens. But Donald Trump has said he's going to use it for purposes of harboring criminal aliens that aren't being accepted by their home countries. Now, there's domestic law and there's international law. American law has, in the 21st century, the Supreme Court has weighed in on a couple of important matters that are relevant here. In 2001,
oh,
the
actually,
Supreme Oh, you want to go to the clip first?
Yeah, because I was thinking, but if you're gonna bring in more context when it comes to, I want to specifically the legal aspects, because there were some problems when it comes to the detaining of terrorists, of some of those in
Well,
Guantanamo
in
Bay. It's spec
2008,
yeah.
yeah, there's a famous case in 2008 that with regard to military detainees, that is to say, people captured on the battlefield or arrested for terrorism or arrested abroad because they're terrorists. Now, if you put them in to Guantanamo, George Bush thought he was bypassing the federal court's jurisdiction. In 2008, the Supreme Court weighed in and said no, just because it's not technically the territory of the United States is just renting it, leasing it, if you will. It still does not mean that it's outside the jurisdiction of federal courts. The right of the writ of habeas corpus still applies. Federal jurisdiction and due process still apply. Now, with regard to military detainees, say terrorists and people captured on a battlefield, it may be only a military court that they get, as opposed to a civil court or an immigration court. And it would seem to me that these illegal aliens, as the unpolitically correct term goes, they would have the same due process rights there as they would if they were kept in the United States. And I think the 2008 Supreme Court case says at least that. Federal courts still have jurisdiction over what the United States government does there and who they do it to and how they do it to them. An earlier case, 2001 Supreme Court case, had said that deportees, people that the government wants to deport because they say they've committed a crime or they've violated the immigration law and there's a deportation order for some reason, if the home country won't accept back the deportee, the government has presumptively 6 months, or they get released back into the United States. You can punish them for the crime. So you commit a crime, you do the punishment in prison, and then the United States wants to evict them, deport them. You can't do that indefinitely. You can't hold them in custody indefinitely. You've got 6 months unless there's a reasonable chance that you're going to get them deported back. You're in the process of negotiations with that country. So again, the government has certain limits on how long they can detain deportees, people that they wanted to deport, even criminal deportees. Now, that's recent Supreme Court law. International law is a lot fuzzier on this. The general international rule, and we've spoken about how international law is really no law at all, and this is a great case in point. There are Geneva Conventions about refugees, and there are Geneva Conventions about ethnic cleansing and things like that. But the general rule is that a country accepts its own natives back when they're deported from another country. So if an American goes to Japan or if an American goes to the United Kingdom and they commit a crime in those countries, they can be punished for the crime there. But the typical thing that happens is they're evicted from the country. They're deported. They're labeled persona non grata, no longer welcome in the country, if you will. And that's the standard thing that happens to Americans and everyone else. So the normal rule is a country is to accept their deportees. But what if they don't? And we had a case when Trump came in. Colombia said, we're not taking back the deportees. There was some strong arming by Trump. And suddenly Colombia says, okay, we'll accept your planes. In fact, we'll send our plane to go get them. But that's what it really amounts to. It has to be a country by country basis if the country simply refuses to take the deportees, even though that is the norm in international law, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll just I have to mention because there was a White House correspondence when it came to specifically the Colombia and basically potential. I'm not sure if they were specifically discussing tariffs or some sort of basically influence to be put on Colombia, and it was funny because Colombia was misspelled in the White House. Basically, it said Columbia, so I was like, oh, are we gonna like sanction Columbia University? But maybe not so much. But yeah, then let's listen to Trump speak about it, and then we can talk a bit more. Oh, where? Let me. Sorry. Oh, there it is. There we go.
Today, I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it. We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. Some of them are so bad we don't even trust the countries to hold them because we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately, right? And that's a tough place to get out of. Today's signings bring us one step closer to eradicating the scourge of migrant crime in our communities once and for all. And it was just it's just an unforced error that we even have to be doing this. Now we need Congress to provide full funding for the complete and total restoration of our sovereign borders, as well as financial support to remove record numbers of illegal aliens.
So just something that sort of jumped out to me. Well, first, Trump's, many people don't even know we have this, and it's okay. But some people in the chat were saying, are we sure it's only violent criminal immigrants? Can we guarantee that exactly zero peaceful immigrants will be there? Why do you think Trump will follow the law here? What about his behavior makes you think he cares? And something also Trump specifically said is that maybe he just misspoke, but he said like some of these criminals are so violent that we cannot even trust the countries to like take them back in, or which sort of goes against the idea of this being the purpose of basically just keeping them there so those countries take them back. But if from the on ground the sort of intention is to keep them there, I think that goes against the idea of at least the way I was understanding how this is supposed to be used. So James, can you give us some more clarification of what Trump means here?
Well, the thing what Trump means, obviously, is Gitmo was, as it's called, was famous for holding terrorist detainees. And so he wants to really stress a point PR-wise. I think he also wants to avoid the media cameras. You remember in his first term, they had the images of illegal aliens in cages, in effect, cages that had been built and used by Obama, as I say, who deported 3 million people, not all of whom were criminals, by the way, most of whom were not convicted of violent acts. I know that distinction is important to objectivists. It's important to me. I think that peaceful people, I think migration is a good thing. And I think peaceful, law-abiding people have a right to be here. And for many objectivists, such as myself, the fact that you commit a crime makes a difference. That is to say, if you're convicted of a crime, you lose many of your rights. And if you're a recent arrival, it would seem to me perfectly reasonable to say that you've lost your right to remain in the country. That is not universally agreed to even by objectivists. Some objectivists don't believe in any immigration laws, whatever. But for those objectivists who, like me, draw a line between violent illegal aliens and just regular, quote, illegal aliens, because of the moral distinction there, unfortunately, the United States law does not make that distinction. There are people who, if they return after being evicted, they've committed a crime. And for example, there are many outstanding deportation orders that the Biden administration simply did not enforce. But to get to the point that the questioner had about, can Trump just get away with this and how do we know? Well, as I was pointing out, there will be judicial oversight. He's not some dictator just because it's Guantanamo Bay. The United States Supreme Court has stated that even if you're in Guantanamo Bay, you don't lose your right. The federal court still has jurisdiction. The federal courts get to review those rights. You have due process rights. You have the right of habeas corpus. And obviously, if it's a wartime situation or a terrorist, it may be only a military tribunal. But in this case, you get immigration courts and immigration judges. So people who are sent to Guantanamo Bay can certainly file a writ of habeas corpus and have their rights protected in federal court. There's a federal court check. There's a system of checks and balances in our system of government. And Trump can't just do whatever he wants just because it's Guantanamo Bay. And indeed, we have a Supreme Court case that kind of puts time limits on even a criminal deportee who's committed some other crime, how long you have to get the other country to accept them. 6 months, as I say, from that 2001 case, unless there's a reasonable chance that you can get the other country to take them back soon.
Yeah, I mean, this whole basically that part, what is it called again? The Guantanamo Migrant Operation Center is going to be handled by ICE, so it will have that sort of oversight. And as you've said, like the things that have happened in the past, in theory, should no longer be even allowed to happen, since that deal sort of or sort of that law is already has already been decided by the Supreme Court. And if anything in a sense goes wrong there, that's sort of my biggest worry, because when I was like thinking about it, I cannot really see anything that wrong besides about it. It seems like sort of a sensible decision, besides the fact that it's Trump doing it, and I'm sort of suspicious of like his own actions, and some possible uneasiness from what has happened there in the past. But I think those, in theory, should be mitigated. So I mean,
Well,
many
a lot of
people, yeah, many people in the chat, as well as I've seen a few objectives basically being sort of uneasy about it. But James, what do you? I mean, maybe we can go there. What do you think is the worst that could happen when it comes to maybe not like, and we mean in like an actual like worst thing that can happen, not like some made up scenario, like when it comes to, for example, peaceful immigrants being there, being deported, or not,
uh,
as Trump has said, the violent ones or the most
right.
violent ones.
Trump has suggested this will be for violent criminals, but there's no theoretical reason why peaceful deportees, people with court deportees, when the court has heard your case to see whether or not you qualify under the refugee law, and they say, no, you don't, and there's an order from the court, deport this person, they are probably, most cases, the vast majority of cases, they've not committed some other crime, much less a violent crime. So there's nothing in the law that would stop Trump from putting, call them non-criminal illegal aliens into Guantanamo. And but even if it's just criminal aliens he puts there, surely there are going to be cases that are going to be generated, and we may get some more guidance from the Supreme Court on how they must be treated. There was a controversy during the campaign last year. What will Trump do if he has, tens of thousands of people? He'll have to create camps, and they thought that there'd be these military camps where they would keep all these illegal immigrant deportees as they're waiting for being processed out of the country and trying to get the home country to accept them back. But I don't, he's simply saying, look, this is a facility we already have and can use that increases our, listen to the way he was talking about it. This increases our capacity by at least 30,000. So, and as I say, it has been used to hold aliens before for immigration purposes. So it's not unprecedented. We do have Supreme Court law on the matter, which does afford some legal rights, at least, to illegal immigrants. And the concept illegal immigrant, I know for many objectivists, is itself a dubious one if you're just a peaceful person trying to work and live here. On the other hand, as I say, the Supreme Court law does not agree with objectivist ethics on the matter of force and the law and rights, and so the law doesn't make a huge distinction between criminal and non-criminal aliens, as we're calling them, as many objectivists such as myself do. Absent you're violating someone else's rights, it's difficult for me as an objectivist to justify the court using force against you or the legal system using force against you to remove you from the country or use force in any legal force in any other way. But if you commit a crime, I think an argument, at least under objectivist ethics, can be made that you've lost certain rights. And if you're recently into the country, and now the question is how recent. And see, there are all kinds of factual scenarios like that. How long? Is there a distinction between those who've committed crimes and those who haven't that might be tested in the court? And this might generate more Supreme Court law on the topic, if that makes sense. But no, Trust Trump? Well, I don't trust the law because the law doesn't make the appropriate moral distinctions that I would make. There are objectivists who think that there shouldn't be any immigration laws, whatever. And technically speaking, it's not in the Constitution. In the middle of the 19th century, the Supreme Court simply unilaterally stated that the federal government had a right to, as any sovereign nation does, to regulate immigration, even though that is not one of the listed powers of Congress in Section 8 of Article 1 of the United States Constitution. It was sort of a power usurped by the United States government and given the green light by the Supreme Court when they wanted to pass something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, a really horrible racist law, which made it difficult for the Chinese to immigrate and very difficult for the Chinese to become citizens of the United States. But in any event, there are legal protections. There are legal protections for people who are detainees at Gitmo. Even the terrorists, even 9/11 terrorists, were found to have a due process right, and that Guantanamo Bay is not outside the jurisdiction of the federal courts of the United States. They can bring writs of habeas corpus and so forth. And whether they get a military tribunal or an immigration judge, I think is a matter of what law they're being held under by the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the Supreme Court decisions, and they'll have a ton of work with Trump in office, it seems like, because he's been pretty much going in, or at least wanting to sort of challenge a bunch of things. When it comes to specifically his 14th Amendment, let's say challenge, I cannot wait for the Supreme Court decision saying we agree with Trump, illegal aliens are not under U.S. jurisdiction, and in a double whammy decision we also say that there are actually no illegal aliens because the federal government has no right over control of immigration. So I'd be happy with that sort of ruling.
I wouldn't bet on it. I would bet that the Supreme Court upholds that unilateral usurpation of the power to regulate immigration. That, I think, is the safe bet from the Supreme Court. Now, how they handle the due process rights of people being processed for deportation is a separate matter. Whether they'll revisit the time limits, for example, from that 2001 case, the 6 months they have, unless there's a reasonable chance you can get them deported, that might be revisited and looked at. But you're absolutely right. The one case that's going to really be interesting is on birthright citizenship. That is very interesting because there's another case that's about 127 years old, a Supreme Court case that says that the native-born child of immigrants from another country does have birthright citizenship, if you will. And they'd have to, I think, either modify or reverse that for Trump to prevail. But at least Trump is asking for Supreme Court guidance, I think, in making the rule itself. He knows it's going to be challenged, and at the end, he'll know whether or not he needs a constitutional amendment or not. But I don't expect him. My guess is he will not prevail on the birthright citizenship matter, but the Supreme Court will uphold the federal government's power to regulate immigration. If I was a betting man, that's how I'd bet.
We have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. A super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And Robert has been a member for 33 months. He says, we could have survived 4 more years of Biden-Harris. Well, it would be Harris both, right? Will we survive 4 years of Donald J. Trump version 2.0, exponentially worse than version 1? I mean, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, from day one, Trump has been, going strong. I mean, we'll have to see where we'll go. Again, we are only 11 days in.
I have no one has greater sympathy for. I live in Southern California, and I was a prosecutor in Southern California, and very often my crime victims or my crime witnesses were illegally in the country, and I did everything I could to avoid any contact with federal immigration officials. I did not want them deported simply because they were a victim or a witness to a crime. I have tremendous sympathy for people who are illegally in this country when I myself believe in much more liberal immigration laws. But I would remind people that this is not without precedent. Trump isn't making up the law. In the 8 years he was president, Obama deported over 3 million people, most of whom were not people who'd committed some violent crime. They were just people with deportation orders. And in the next 4 years, in my view, Trump will be lucky to deport anything like 3+ million people like Obama did. But deportations, even large-scale deportations, have happened repeatedly in America's past. This is not something Trump invented. So we should all just take a chill pill here. There are many reasons to criticize Trump, in my view, but let's keep historical context. I think that's vital.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the biggest sort of worry when it comes to with Trump, and I had it with several things, even when it comes to sort of challenging the Supreme Court, because I sort of said, like, in some ways, I think we do want basically challenges, or not sort of challenges, but more clarification of basically, what, because yeah, it's not really an easy question. Like, if illegal, if people who are here illegally, and again, when the decision was made, I'm not sure if you could even be like a illegal immigrant, because there were not the same laws on the books. So and you have a child, do they get a citizenship? It's a pretty interesting question. But what worries me more is the motivation. Like, I don't think sort of Trump's motivation is, he's such a constitutional originalist. He just wants like more, clarification of this matter, or he's such a believer in judicial jurisprudence that, he really wants to get in the weeds and sort of like argue it. That's sort of what I think is much more scary. Again, the method of doing things is usually much more scary than the specific aspects.
And I'm certain that the position he would argue for in the courts is to give the executive more power, less limits, fewer limits on the time, for example, that a deportee can be kept in federal custody, things like that. He's going to be arguing for as an aggressive and open-ended power to detain illegal immigrants as he possibly can. But the existing law is the existing law, and there are judicial protections even for people who are being detained in Guantanamo Bay, which is technically not part of the United States.
I might as well. I have a quote from a Cuban president here when it comes to this case. I might as well read it out. He said, in an act of brutality, the new U.S. government announces the imprisonment at the Guantanamo naval base located in illegally occupied territory, Cuba, of thousands of migrants that it forcibly expels, and will place them next to the well-known prisons of torture and illegal detention, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel wrote on X. And, I'm kind of happy that we are America, or I'm not, but you are in America and not Cuba, because this is kind of sort of
in my view, the current Cuban government is a dictatorship and is not a legitimate government and can make no legitimate claims to any territory, including Havana. So the fact that it's illegally occupied by the United States is a bad premise. America went to war to liberate Cuba from the Spanish Empire, and there may have been very dubious governments that controlled Cuba for most of the 20th century, but America did engineer a lease for Guantanamo Bay, and has wanted to pay the rent as cheap as the rent is. I mean, $4,000 for a whole big military base, an entire bay in Cuba, does seem like pretty nominal rent to me. Nonetheless, that has more legitimacy in my mind than the current government in Havana.
And with that, I think we've pretty much covered this topic. I think, as with many things that have happened, we also haven't talked about the unfortunate accident that has happened. And, unfortunately, Trump is quick to already say what caused it, which I think, again, is unfortunate. But with both of these things, I think we'll learn more about it, hopefully, in the future, especially when it comes to preventing such a thing. Because, no matter who you want to like put the blame on, what's more important is like solving it and making sure it doesn't happen
Well, he
again.
takes to the, I mean, if I could just have one comment on that. He takes to the press the same day before he knows that there are any DEI hires there and to blame the DEI system. Do we know that there are psychologically or medically or mentally defective people in that tower that day? We don't, but he comes out without the facts to blame DEI, just for example. Don't start making political hay and any politician on any side until we have the facts, until we know what is relevant or not. I'm not a supporter of DEI. On the other hand, it seems to me he should wait until we have some facts to show that it was relevant to this case. It seems to me that the FAA understaffs. The FAA shouldn't exist, but insofar as they control air traffic control in the United States, they're completely understaffed. There were insufficient numbers there, perhaps, but even on that, I would keep my powder dry until I had all the facts on the matter. And to jump on it like Trump did, I think is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I might as well mention it because I'm not sure if we'll do a full episode. Some are potentially saying, and again, we need like more info about this, that Trump might have potentially had some play in it when it comes to his sort of federal freeze on employment. Now, again, I have no idea if that can like take effect in like week and a half, because again, that's a pretty like quick thing. But
both sides, you see, ridiculously try to make political hay out of it before the facts have all come out. And that is, generally speaking, a mistake. As a former prosecutor, when I hear of a criminal case, people will often ask me, what's your opinion? Well, I don't have an opinion until I get more facts. And until we get all the relevant facts, it's irresponsible to make a public opinion, state of public opinion on a matter, but call me old-fashioned.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get more information both on this case and hopefully when it comes to this expansion of the Guantanamo Migrant Operations Center. I hope, because on the face of it, it doesn't sound like the most outrageous idea, so I hope it will not go wrong in any way. But when it comes to any sort of both
there were all
like
kinds of allegations that the 9/11 type and the terrorist types that were being held there were being mistreated. The 9/11 people were waterboarded for information, etc. And that's controversial, but there were visitors there, there were attorneys there, they have due process rights. Federal courts do have jurisdiction over Guantanamo and can check any of Trump's behavior there. So look at it that way, folks. It's not the end of the universe in terms of judicial due process, at least.
yeah, and with that, thank you, James, for joining me today. There will be no reality show today, but we will be back tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective. Thank you, James, again. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We also have a super chat from Gail. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if I read it. And with that, thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.